Hey everyone, how's it going? I wanted to make a video explaining the Psych Social section of the MCAT. It's a section that I know many people tend to have an easier time in because a lot of this section just revolves around memorization of concepts and applying them to the exam. And many people often tend to find that issues with timing are not that big of an issue on the Psych Social section of the exam. So it's very common that I see students do the best on that section of the exam, especially when it comes to their diagnostic and then practice tests subsequently. However, I will say that there are still some barriers in Psych Social which can prevent people from getting a very high score. I personally have gotten a 130 on the Psych Social section of the exam, in which the score report is right here. I believe that was somewhere like a 93rd percentile, if I'm not mistaken. Again, the score report right there, it states the percentile. I don't exactly remember it off the top of my head. Nonetheless, I scored well above the 90th percentile for that section, so I feel as I have really good advice to give on how to do well in that section. Because I'll tell you this, from tutoring dozens of students, I've always seen a common pattern that students, they will study their Anki flashcards and they'll improve in Psych Soc up until a 128. It's kind of like a ceiling that they can't seem to break above. I don't know why, but I've always seen people just hit a 128 and they can never seem to improve from that. And I personally have experienced that as well, which can be pretty frustrating. So I'm here to give you some of my tips in the section and how to do well in it. My first tip in Psych Soc is not only to memorize cards via Anki. I think that is a fantastic start, but you also need to watch videos such as Khan Academy, but not only watch videos for the sake of watching videos, but watching videos so that way you can apply examples to your definition. Because I think when you apply examples to your Psych Soc definitions, it's able to convey that you have a greater understanding of the definition and that you're able to apply it to an example, which makes you more able to apply the definition to a test question that it gives you. Because remember, the MCAT is not a test about regurgitation. It's a test that tests you on application of material that you should have memorized. For example, this is very good for tricky concepts in Psych Soc that many people tend to not get very easily at all. I'll give you a great example of a definition that I found on a miles down Anki card that I personally did not understand until I heard an example about it. So this concept known as reaction formation, it's a concept that's relatively low yield on the Psych Soc section of the MCAT exam. However, when I went through it on the miles down Anki, I remember the definition being something along the lines of reaction formation is the opposite reaction that you would have to something as some sort of defense mechanism. I'm paraphrasing the definition. It's been 2 years, or if not a year and a half since I memorized that. So that was the rough paraphrase I remember. Anyway, regardless of whether or not my paraphrase is accurate, I remembered that when reading that definition, I found myself very confused and I didn't learn anything just from memorizing the definition, which is why I don't always suggest memorizing definitions is the best way to go when it comes to the MCAT, because what good is it memorizing if you don't understand it? So what I did instead was that I tried to look up a video of reaction formation and I found it on Khan Academy. There are also some other YouTube channels that can explain definitions of MCAT concepts. Like an example would be Leah for Psy. I used quite a lot of her videos, even though I think she focuses more on Chem Biz and Biochem, and I haven't seen too much of her content with Psych Soc. Again, y'all can go and check it out. But anyway, there are some videos that explain these concepts very well. And I remember I watched a Khan Academy video on reaction formation. And the example they gave was super good because they set up the definition of reaction formation as such. Reaction formation happens very often in school, where if, let's say, a girl likes a guy, her friends will know about it and they will tease her about it. They'll be like, hey, you like him? Ooh. They're going to say stuff like that. And then the girl subsequently, she knows she's being made fun of for liking the guy. She's going to immediately defend herself by saying, no, I don't like him. He's ugly. He's horrible. He's trash. Those are the types of things that that girl would say. And this happens quite a lot in elementary school, high school, college, even in the adult world. These are things that happen where if somebody likes someone and they don't want to admit it, they're going to say opposite things about that person, because they find that person attractive. So instead, they're going to say degrading things about them by saying, oh no, he's stupid, he's dumb, he's not desirable. When in reality, they feel the opposite way. That is reaction formation defined by an example, which I found a lot more relatable and a lot more helpful. Do that for every concept you know in Psych Soc, and you will succeed on the exam, because the exam requires you differentiating between concepts that sound awfully similar, but they're not the same. An example would be conformity versus groupthink. They sound awfully similar, but in reality, conformity means that you're kind of following the crowd. And groupthink is the phenomenon in which individual opinions tend to be suppressed because you want to impress the group, so to say. And there are slight differences between the two examples. Conformity is more like trying to fit in, while groupthink is more about trying to please the group. Because groupthink isn't so much about fitting in, as in you're trying to appease the group, even though you as an individual might feel like that you have different opinions that are better. Whereas with conformity, you truly believe that you should fit in within the group entirely. Another thing about Psych Soc is that you need to learn the scientific method pretty well, because that's a thing that comes across in biochem. Reading figures and in tough to interpret passages. That comes in Psych Soc. You need to know experimental design very well. What I mean by that is what makes a good negative control, what makes a good positive control, how do you control for confounding variables, what is internal validity, external validity, mediating and moderating variables. You need to be very well versed in experimental design in Psych Soc, because that is often where I see people not improving their scores and hitting that 128 ceiling I see very often. Last tip with Psych Soc is that some people call it CARS 2.0. And I would agree with that, because with the tougher questions, they require closer passage reading and tougher critical thinking skills. So you need to sharpen your critical thinking and use the method I've always been preaching, which is to read the question carefully and answer what the question is trying to say by using certain keywords within the question stem. I would argue that Psych Soc is the one section in which keywords are the most crucial, because sometimes you only need 1 to 2 words within the question stem to get the right answer if you know it very well. Anyway, without further ado, I want to jump into a passage so you all can see what I mean by what I'm saying. There's only so much I could talk about this exam, and I think it's just more of a show rather than tell thing when it comes to teaching the MCAT. There's no other way about it, which is why I personally like making these videos. All right, so yeah, right now we are on a passage that is dealing with millennials within the workplace. Yeah, so keep in mind that in Psych Soc, it's not only about psychology, but they test you in sociology too, which is how different groups and populations of people interact with each other, as a general definition. Regardless, both concepts that can intertwine within the exam. That happens very commonly. So this passage is fairly short, nothing too bad. So let's go ahead and jump into it without further ado. As the baby boomer generation retires, millennials will dominate the workforce. Misunderstanding the differences between generations can detrimentally affect employee performance and satisfaction. Differences between generations can create problems such as distrust among employees, lack of teamwork, and high turnover rates. These problems make it vital to understand unique values and demands of millennials as to how they may differ from other generations. A lot of times these passages, people tend to do well in them because they're more relatable. We can understand that there's kind of a generational gap between millennials versus baby boomers. That's essentially what this passage is saying. First paragraph. Researchers conducted a series of baby boomers on the perceived positive and negative qualities of the millennial generation. So I'm going to highlight what they did, which is surveys. More than anything, researchers found that baby boomers believed millennials were confident, and that this confidence can be attributed to the trust and optimism fostered by previous generations. All right, that's the positive quality. Previous research also found that millennials rank higher in self-esteem and assertiveness when compared to previous generations at the same age. Millennials are also known to be goal-oriented and good team players, often resulting in promotion in the workplace. Okay, so they talked about the survey on positive and negative qualities. So far, I think we're listening to the positive. I don't know if we're going to get into negative later on. We'll see. Common complaints, there we go, the negative qualities. Common complaints from baby boomers are that millennials can be challenging to interact, as they are entitled and overly focused on maintaining a healthy work-life balance. See, these passages are relatable because chances are you probably heard of this from outside. Anyway, this manifests as millennials expressing more opinions and making greater demands than their experienced counterparts. Baby boomers also voice negative opinions surrounding millennials' desire for feedback. Wow, okay. Millennials have been perceived as needing constant feedback. And when feedback is not provided, they will interpret their own work as unsatisfactory. The continuous need for feedback can cause frustration in an organization and delays many workplace tasks. A second survey found that millennials are viewed as the look at me generation by baby boomers, as millennials are often perceived to exude over the top false confidence in order to gain attention in larger projects. So, summary of this passage, baby boomers, millennials talk about that they have a bit of a clash, and they're talking about the positive qualities that baby boomers see millennials and the negative qualities. A lot of times, psych passages are very easy to summarize, and doing well in psych can often teach you how to do well in the rest of the exam, because it is a standardized test. And I think that if you apply methodologies from Chem, Phys, Bio, Biochem in terms of passage reading, as well as even CARS to Psych Soc, you're going to do well in the exam. Because the base foundation of the entire exam is critical thinking, which goes back to reading the question stem carefully, keywords. That applies to every single section of the exam, even CARS. Section I didn't do too well in, but yeah. I mean, I got a 126. It's a decent score, but it's not fabulous like my other sections. All right. That aside, question 1. Which of the following could explain the findings of the second survey? Yeah, let's see where the second survey was. Where was it? They conducted a series of surveys. I believe the second one would have been focused on the negative. Let's see. Oh, no, it's down here. Yeah, a second survey found that millennials are viewed as the look at me generation by baby boomers, and they are often perceived to exude over-the-top false confidence in order to gain attention in larger projects. So that's what that is where our answer lies. It lies within that highlighted section that you saw me highlight in gray. Now, we just need to identify the concept behind it. So it seems like they say they perceive to exude over-the-top false confidence. Yeah, we're going to have to read through each answer choice and see if it matches with any of those concepts. Where it's talking about in-group versus out-group association. In-group association is more dealing with that millennials, they would have their own group, and that they would not let other people into their group, so to say. Like, if you have a group of friends that you hang out with, a close group that you tell your secrets to, you're not going to be so willing to let a stranger enter in and know all of your secrets. I'm not really seeing that in this part of the highlighting that I did. We're not saying, hey, there's exclusion going on. They say they exude over the top confidence, but there's no exclusion or inclusion. That's why A is not really a good choice. Primary versus secondary group ties. Yeah, so this concept is dealing with primary, or like the people who are very close to you, like very close friends, family, people who you interact with and are very close with on a day-to-day basis. Whereas secondary are people who are not as close to you, which could include maybe, I don't know, your teachers, maybe distant family, people who you only see once in a while and you don't have that close of an intimate relation with. Again, we're not really dealing with relationships in that regard. We're dealing more with how millennials tend to present themselves as people, which could deal with the concept of overconfidence potentially, but we'll have to see with the other answers. So crossing up B. Front stage versus backstage presentation. Let me re-highlight this again. Yeah, so this is dealing with, I might get this concept wrong, the dramaturgical effect, if I am saying that correctly. The idea behind this concept is that we have a front stage self in which we like to, when you're performing a play, you have to get dressed up. You have to put on like your makeup or your costume and all of that, a mask. You're essentially performing a show in front of other people. That is what the front stage self is. For example, if I were to do an interview for a medical school, I need to put on a suit, look my best, probably cut my hair, I don't know. Yeah, shower for sure. And I need to put on my best self. I can't be cracking jokes. I mean, sometimes you can in interviews. I'll explain that in a subsequent video. But you can't be cracking immature jokes. You have to be polite in medical school interviews. So that is called your front stage self. Your backstage self is who you are when nobody else is watching. So perhaps people like your family, close friends, might see who you are when you let yourself loose and you let yourself off guard. And when you tend to relax a bit more like this. Hopefully that defines that concept pretty well. But I think that this passage, I mean, what I highlighted here in gray, does capture a front stage self. Because baby boomers said millennials, they seem to exude over the top false confidence. So maybe the millennials are putting on a show, so to say, by trying to be overly confident in front of their coworkers. I think C could be a decent choice in that case. But let's go through D just to make sure. Role conflict versus role strain. Yeah, role conflict is defined as when you have multiple roles. You know, like for example, which I'm about to experience soon, when I go to medical school, I'm going to balance the role of being a student, but I'm also a son, to my parents. And I might also become a volunteer if I work in a free clinic. So you have multiple roles that you tend to balance out. And the idea behind role conflict is that you have so many roles that you're juggling, sometimes it can get stressful, especially if people work like 3 jobs in 3 different fields. They could do this job, then that job, then that job, and then they take care of their children. That's a lot of roles they have to balance, so they can get overwhelmed. That is the definition of role conflict. Role strain is, in a way, the opposite, but it's dealing with the amount of responsibilities within one role. So for example, role strain might be that as a physician, you might have to chart patients, you have to see patients, you have to possibly do surgery depending on your specialty. There's a lot of responsibility and demand within just that one role. That's what role strain is. So I don't think this answer is D because it's not talking about any type of responsibilities with multiple roles or just one role. C is our good pick, and I'm going to pick that. See if that's what it is. Yep. The dramaturgical theory, the dramaturgical effect. I don't know if I said it right the first time, but that is the name of the theory. All right. Question 2. A large group of managers identifying as baby boomers were surveyed on their opinions regarding millennial and baby boomer colleagues. The vast majority gave more favorable scores to their baby boomer colleagues. Oof. Which concept best explains these results? So it says that the managers identified as baby boomers and that they unsurprisingly gave higher scores to their colleagues. So that would demonstrate in-group bias because they're more favorable to people who identify with their own group. I like A lot for that reason. Yeah, B, the formation of a triad among the managers. A triad is a group of 3. We never really ever get that in the question step. And the concept behind that is that in the MCAT, dyads are a group of 2 people. The idea is that when you have 2 people talking, you can have very intimate conversations potentially. But if the 2 people don't know each other, there's more chance for awkwardness. So you have higher intimacy, less stability with 2 people talking. With 3 people talking, you have a degree of intimacy removed because you can't feel the need for 2 people to share something very intimate when another person is there. However, there is a higher degree of stability given that if 2 people run out of things to say, the 3rd person can contribute something to the conversation. That is what they mean by triads, but we're not talking about stability here. Completely unrelated. Psych Social will do this. This is why, even right now, I'm able to come up with these definitions off the top of my head. And not definitions, but I'm able to apply them and explain them to you all. And that's where I want you all to get when it comes to doing well in Psych Social. You should be able to very clearly explain the definition to someone else. Because that is utilizing active learning at its best. And that is how you're not going to be swayed by these wrong answers that have absolutely nothing to do with the concept that the question is asking. Self-fulfilling prophecy. You guys have probably heard this phenomenon where it's probably summed up by Confucius, who said that there was a man who said he can and a man who said he can't, and they were both right. And self-fulfilling prophecy, for all of y'all who don't know, is that when you say something, it's more likely to come true. For example, actually a very real thing, which is why I strongly encourage positive thinking when it comes to the MCAT. You should believe that you are an MCAT expert, because when you do, you're going to do well on the MCAT. That is self-fulfilling prophecy. And there are other passages on Psych Soc that have proven that self-fulfilling prophecy is a true thing. However, in this question, it's unrelated. Yep. Prestige of a management position. Perhaps it might be prestigious to be a manager, but nowhere in the question stem does it imply that the concept being tested is prestige. It's more related to in-group bias. That's really what it is, because they're selecting people who are also baby boomers, which means they probably like them better. Nice. It is answer choice A. A millennial manager approaches a new employee from the baby boomer generation. Okay, so the manager is millennial. Let me get this straight. You have to get the party straight when it comes to Psych Soc. New employee from the baby boomer generation with the assumption that baby boomers know less about technology. Does this scenario illustrate discrimination? Yeah, this is actually a very good question to go over, because people, and even in the real world, they often get the definitions of prejudice and discrimination confused. But on the MCAT, you're required to know the subtle differences between the two. So allow me to explain. Prejudice deals with a thought. For example, if you have a thought like this manager had, this millennial has a thought that baby boomers don't know much about technology. And he doesn't have any logical basis for that assumption. That is considered prejudice, because that thought appeared in his head, and that's related to his belief. Discrimination requires you acting upon the thought. So for example, the millennial manager, if he were to have discriminated against the baby boomer in this scenario, perhaps the baby boomer might have applied to become a computer manager. But the millennial said, no, I'm not going to hire you because I think that baby boomers don't know much about technology. Discrimination is when you choose to act upon a prejudice. It is known as a behavioral component. Behavioral meaning that you act upon it. Whereas prejudice is more of a cognitive component, which means that you choose just to believe in it, and it's your own thoughts and beliefs by themselves. So, does it illustrate discrimination? The answer is no, because the millennial is only thinking a belief about that baby boomers know less about technology. So answer choice A and C are immediately gone. Now, let's see B. The scenario describes a stereotype but does not specify differential treatment. I'm liking B, because that is true. He has no logical basis for his assumption, which is the definition of a stereotype. And then D. No, the scenario illustrates a bias directed to an individual and not a group. D is a true statement. But here's the thing. It's a true statement, but that's not the reason why the millennial is making the statement. He's making the statement because he's making a general assumption about a group of people without any logical evidence or reasoning to it. While D is a true statement, it doesn't answer the question based off of what the question stem is describing. This is sometimes where Psych Soc can get a little tricky, because you need to find the answer that is completing what the question stem is trying to tell you. And it ends up being answer choice B. Yeah, nobody picked D, even though I actually think D might have been a pretty good trap answer. Yeah. And then just to define it here, cognition is your beliefs. So what this millennial manager believed is a stereotype, because he believed baby boomers are less capable of handling technology. Again, there's no logical reasoning for that basis, which is why stereotypes can often be offensive, because sometimes people, they are judged before you get to know them based off of very limited information you have about them. I also want to explain affect, because they call them the ABCs of that's this mnemonic, at least on Psych Soc. Affect is referring to your feelings about it. So if this millennial manager were to have some sort of negative feeling or to feel upset or angry, that would be a type of that would be affection in that regard. And then behavior is discrimination. So yeah, it was a tricky question. Many people tend to miss when they're starting off studying in Psych Soc. You need to have these definitions down pat. All right. A follow-up study found that baby boomers voiced stronger opinions on millennials when they were interviewed in group settings. This can be explained by which of the following? Well, let's go through each answer. I know what it is, but I'm not going to give it away until I go through all of the answers. De-individuation. De-individuation is like a mob mentality. So a lot of times when people are rioting in mobs and like throwing stuff like, hey, they're going crazy, they often tend to lose who they are as an individual because they feel like the group can just blanket their identity and hide them. So oftentimes people in mobs tend to behave a lot more chaotically due to the fact that they feel like that the group can hide them as an individual, and they get a sense of anonymity, which is often why sometimes what police do is that they go into mobs and they try to break them up and disperse them to get rid of this de-individuation. Actor-observer bias. I will have to go over this definition because I'm not sure if I can get it off the top of my head. I'll link it in the description if I turn out to be wrong, just to let you all know. But actor-observer bias is related to, I believe, it was related to situational attribution versus dispositional attribution. Yeah, let me think about that. Yeah, I believe that's what it's related to. Essentially, it's when you tend to defend your own actions regardless of the situation, but then when it comes to a stranger, you tend to always find fault in them. I don't see any of that going on in answer choice B. Yeah, because stronger opinions is more actually leaning towards group polarization, which is what the choice is. I just want to be able to eliminate these answers clearly. Yeah. See, even for me, I have to go over these definitions again, and that is totally fine. That's actually a way in which I suggest you succeed in Psych Soc. You need to be able to define things off the top of your head. And for B, I'm struggling a little, not gonna lie, because it's been a while since I've gone over this stuff, and that's okay. That is where you need to talk to yourself and be like, hey, I need to review this a bit more. Groupthink. Well, groupthink is the phenomenon in which oftentimes individuals will tend to give up their own opinions in order to appease their group, which is not really what we're seeing here. We're seeing that there's stronger opinions to one side when they were interviewed in group settings, which is what the definition of group polarization is. See, sometimes groupthink and group polarization can be confused, which is why I suggest you have a precise definition and example related to groupthink. For example, a really good definition that comes to groupthink would be the Cuban Missile Crisis when it came to John F. Kennedy. We were so close to World War III in that crisis. It was just crazy. Because what happened was that there were some kind of bad decisions that happened within the Kennedy administration. Not to get too political, but some of him and his generals, they were making decisions to put missiles in Turkey, essentially. And even though some of the people there might have thought, probably not a good idea to put missiles so close to the Soviets, they nonetheless had to repress those opinions in order to appease the group. I remember I read a passage about that in Psych Soc, which is why I bring it up, Anyway, group polarization is what's being captured in this question, because baby boomers are voicing stronger opinions when you're in a group, and that tends to happen quite a lot, where a lot of times people who tend to have a very similar outlook on, let's say, for example, politics, if you get a bunch of people of one party together, they will often have stronger opinions and tend to sway more to an extreme than if they were left alone, because they'll bounce ideas off of each other and be like, yeah, let's believe in it even more. That tends to happen. That is an example in which group polarization can happen. So anyway, just wanted to elaborate on these definitions a lot more. And it is group polarization. But hopefully, all of this advice in Psych Soc gives you a clear picture of how to do better on this section if you find yourself struggling and hitting that 128 ceiling that I've seen dozens of students who I've personally tutored hit in the past. I hope this video helps, and let me know what type of content you'd like to see me make next in relation to the MCAT and my medical school journey. It's very exciting. I look forward to seeing y'all then.